This is honestly the size of the crowd I was expecting for this talk. Yes, just about. So, does anyone in here actually have a new BlackBerry? One, a Z10 or a Q10? You do? Brave man, you admitted it. I have one. Thanks for coming, guys. Good morning. Welcome to GrrCON. Staying hall for the after party? It's a good time. Yeah, this conference is great. It's my third time here. My name is Tom Richards. I am a security consultant at Sigil Inc. There's my Twitter handle if you want to follow me on Twitter. Every once in a while I say something. At Sigil I do a lot of assessments, mobile, web, red team assessments also. I'm also an organizer for B-Sides Rochester, Western New York. Thank you, Rocky. And I've also presented here. Geez, this is my third year here. I missed DerbyCon this year, but I did 2 years with a Derby, Carolina Con, B-Sides San Francisco too. So here's the little overview of what we're going to be talking about today. The different sections. We're going to talk about a little intro and history to BlackBerry, the BlackBerry 10 platform security, a little bit about the BlackBerry 10 simulator, some application stuff, and then some random stuff I discovered while I was poking around messing with the systems. Intro. So what is BlackBerry? The company is formerly known as Research in Motion. They're Canadian, so they say apologize a lot. And the company started in the late 80s, early 90s doing pagers. That was how they got into this market. In 2000, it said they introduced their first smartphone that allowed people to get corporate email on their device, one of those big, bulky-looking things. And these devices in the company was very popular with governments and businesses up until about 2007. And 2007 is where we started to see iOS, iPhone and Android start to penetrate the market and take away the market share from BlackBerry. Here's a graph that kind of shows BlackBerry from 03 to last year. This is their stock price. Did really well up until 09 and then plummeted once rivals started entering the scene. The best part about this picture here is it shows the market share from 09. So Symbian was really high, and you could see that RIM in this blue had just about 70% market share, and then it was a very rapid decrease to almost nothing, while you see Android suck up a gigantic portion of that share. So BlackBerry was suffering quite a bit here, and you see their net income just like plummeted around that time too, as they just were no longer relevant in the industry. They got too many competitors, and they were too slow to pick up and do the things that iOS and Android were doing. On the original BlackBerry devices, they had what was called BlackBerry OS, and this was a proprietary operating system that BlackBerry was using. It ran primarily Java apps. That's what the applications would be programmed in, and if you owned BlackBerry before 2013, that's the OS that you had on it. 2013 is when they introduced their first smartphones on the BB10 operating system. The last version of the BBOS to be released was version 7.1, and that also was released in 2013. So, what's BB10? It was an attempt for BlackBerry to try and stay relevant in the face of very fierce competitors. It was a radical departure from the previous OSs. They actually purchased a company called QNX, and that's what BlackBerry 10 was based off of. So they didn't start with anything. They purchased a company and tried to modify this OS. And you wonder what happened to BB8 and 9, right? Went from 7 to 10. Well, they originally were going to call this BBX for a QNX, but BBX was trademarked by someone else, so they just turned the X to a 10. So there was no BlackBerry 8 or 9 in existence. QNX started out as a commercial Unix-like operating system. It was developed in 1982, I think. Yeah, first version was released in 82. It was targeted more towards embedded markets. So a lot of the cars actually run QNX behind the scenes. It was caught on very fast in the embedded market, so that made them a prime target for BlackBerry for the acquisition. What QNX is, it's a microkernel-based operating system that tries to be a real-time operating system, and now they have POSIX compliance. That came later in the time. When we say microkernel, compared to the Windows and the Linux kernel, it's a near minimum amount of software needed to run the operating system. Basically, the kernel is only handling address space management, thread management, and IPC elements between the different processes. Things like device drivers, file system access, protocol stacks, those are all separate programs pretty much running, not running at the kernel level. So they're actually not as privileged as the kernel. And then real time, it intends to respond to application requests in a near real-time fashion. So there's no buffering. It tries, as a thread comes in, it just handles it and passes it along. This is the QNX architecture to kind of put a picture around what's going on. So we have the kernel. Neutrino is the last public version of QNX. This was taken from the Neutrino manual. So the kernel is just responsible for the software bus. So it's making sure, all the memory and stuff here is all good, and that the applications can talk to each other. So all the device drivers and stuff live separately from the kernel, as I previously mentioned. QNX was bought by BlackBerry in 2010. Previous to this, they were actually an open source company. All the QNX source code was released. Day after BlackBerry bought them, closed source. You can't get the new source. You can still find the old stuff out there. And there's actually a lot of development data out there for QNX. They have like developer.qnx.com. It has all the system architecture stuff out there, how QNX was designed and how different pieces build in. There's a wealth of documentation out there if you want to look at QNX as a whole. The first device to be released by BlackBerry off of QNX was the BlackBerry Playbook, and that was a tablet. Anyone here own a Playbook at one point? No, it was a flop in the market too. They called that Tablet OS. It wasn't BB10 yet, it was Tablet OS. That was the first foray in trying to do this. It's a picture of a Playbook. They actually were kind of nice to deal with, but the interface is weird. It had no buttons on it, compared to like an iPad or an Android tablet. You had to like swipe different corners to make stuff happen. It's awkward. The Z10 was the first phone released by BlackBerry to run on the BlackBerry 10 platform. So it was their flagship phone, and that was released in early 2013. Compared to previous models of BlackBerry phones, not so much the BlackBerry Torch, I think, or the Storm had no keyboard. This also had no physical keyboard, which was very odd for BlackBerry at the time. There's a picture of my Z10 on my desk. What was the big difference between the Tablet OS and BB10? They did a number of UI changes, obviously to make it work on a phone and not a tablet. And the biggest system architecture change is they actually allowed you to run Android applications on it. And that was kind of interesting. So there is a full Android environment on a BB10 phone. It actually has its own stack and everything. So you could run Android applications. They originally started to wrap the applications, so BB10 apps have to be in .bar files. You'd have to convert the APK to a bar and sign it before the phone or simulator would accept it for testing. The newer versions actually will just take straight APKs. 10.3 will allow you to install APKs. Originally, there was no store on the phone for Android. You could only go through BlackBerry's App World and wrap and submit stuff to that. BlackBerry made a deal with Amazon saying that in 10.3 you're going to now have the Amazon Android store available on the phone so that you can download apps through there. So you'll be able to download straight Android applications from the Amazon store. There's no Google services on this, so the Gmail and everything is all built into the BB10. There's no Play Store or anything like that. Alright, so let's talk a bit about the platform. The Playbook was rooted really early on through a crazy bug. They really didn't want this to happen again on their 10s. They wanted these phones to be really secure. You couldn't root them. Governments, large industries, intelligence agencies, companies would go to trust these phones because there is no attack surface to it. And they introduced a number of measures to make sure this wasn't going to happen. When you rooted a Playbook, there was a bug. Well, it was a feature, I guess. When you would make a backup, it would make a backup of your files directly on the file system. And the backup user had access to everything that a file system had access to. So what you did is you replaced the Samba config to allow code execution to open up a user so that you can push more stuff onto the file. They patched this really early, really soon after it was released. They patched it. If you buy a playbook today, you actually have to downgrade the OS to a previously vulnerable version, and then root it, and then update to the most recent. The app that does that is called Dingleberry. Normal system level protection here to prevent exploits, ASLR, dep, stack canaries, the jazz. Stuff that you would expect from a modern operating system, except for Android. They didn't introduce ASLR until, 4.0? Took them a little while. Hardware protection. BlackBerry owns these phones straight out, so they control the software and the hardware. So that allows them to implement a number of security features that people that run Android phones necessarily can't build in, because they control the entire assembly line. So the chips and all that stuff is vetted by them. They made their booting process really secure. There are checksums all through here to make sure that all of this is verified and the original ROM. So to try and modify the boot ROM and all that stuff, everything checks the hash of everything else. And the keys are burned in, secret, really crazy stuff. So they really were making sure that you couldn't just hack the bootloader and throw another version of the OS, or download the update file, modify the bar, and get it submitted on the phone. The phone will reject any firmware image that isn't signed by BlackBerry directly. There is application sandboxing, pretty similar to how Android is. Each app gets its own user, and that is enforced by file system permissions. Authman is the process that controls that. Memory is also contained, so the kernel takes care of that. So each application has its own memory and can't touch everyone else. Authman stands for Authorization Manager. It is a resource manager which handles the requests from processes. And what's interesting is that the processes don't make the request straight to Authman. They actually go through the application launcher with another process, and then application launcher makes the request on behalf of the app for system settings, system files, or the camera, all that jazz. And Authman makes sure everything is good, and that so no one can cross, write stuff out of their directories or attack other applications. For corporate use, BlackBerry took the avenue of having a dual persona on the phone, so they had what's called BlackBerry Balance. So if you registered your BlackBerry on the corporate network, it would create this dual persona where the workspaces weren't supposed to mix. So you had the personal space for your personal email, personal apps, all that stuff, and then a completely separate space that had access to the App Store in there too, and also your enterprise App Store. And those apps would run in completely separate process user as your workspace apps. I did have access to BB10 enterprise environment, and what I found was interesting in this is that from the personal to the workspace, no, you couldn't touch anything. But from the workspace to the personal, I could touch stuff. I could touch the clipboard of the personal user, which I'll talk more about the clipboard later. That was a lot of fun. And also, I found a file that had email information there, not the full email, but some header information, who it's from, and the subject line, and the first 5 lines or whatever were in some file that was world readable on the file system. So that was surprising. They did have some stuff that was just opened up. So if you had a malicious work application, it could try and read your personal stuff. All right, so now the simulator. Of course, the spur development, yada, 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 they introduced a simulator that will allow you to develop applications on your computer without actually having to buy a BB10 device. When the simulator came out, there was no device you could buy yet, so they had to get developers ramped up. This is a simulator, not an emulator. It's a VMware image. You can just go and download it, and it is running x86. So the devices are ARM. So when you actually go to deploy to a device, it actually goes through a different compiling scheme in the IDE, and it strips all the symbols automatically and all that fun stuff and compiles it for ARM instead of x86. So you can't just easily take a file from the simulator and install it on the phone. It just won't work. That's similar to how iOS, Apple doesn't. The iPhone is the iPhone simulator you get on your Mac to work on it, as opposed to Android where it's an emulator, so it replicates the device. You go to BlackBerry, you can download the simulator. Latest one is 10.3 to get a full environment there. This is a picture of the old simulator. This is a really early dev alpha that I was running for a while. And there was a couple caveats. I already talked about the application to be recompiled. It doesn't come with root access, asterisks, and there's no BlackBerry World access, so you weren't supposed to get to the store, but that's also an asterisk. You have the simulator, you have this VMware image, what can you do? I want to start poking around the system. You do get access to a limited dev user, but you can't really start poking around a system file, startup scripts, all that fun stuff. So we had shell access, so how are we going to go about getting root, right? It's got to be a way. Well, let's just edit the file system. We have this VMware image, which is a VMware disk. Let's add this to another VM and modify a shadow file or something to add a user or create some other backdoor. Tried this first with my Linux VM. When BlackBerry bought them, they introduced QNX6, which was a closed-source file system for them. And Linux at the time only had read support for QNX6. You could read and write QNX4, which was what Neutrino was running, but it would not run QNX6. So, crap. I can view it all, but now I can't do anything with it. QNX on their website, not on BlackBerry's website, on QNX's website has a development VMware image available for download without registration. Fantastic. Just download a full QNX environment. Perfect. That's just what I needed. Add the BB10 disk to the QNX VM. Boot, mount, edit the etc shadow to include an entry for root, and then you get root telnet access to it. So there's editing the shadow file. So I just copied the dev user so I knew what the password was, which was dev user, and added root. And here's me telnetting into the simulator, showing that I have root access just by using that name. So now it opened up the system for exploration, at least on the simulator. When I tweeted that out, it went like nuts. What's also interesting is that the shadow file is running just des. So I'm really curious if the shadow file... yeah. So I'm really curious if that's how it is on the phone, too. That file is protected on the phone. You can't get to it on the phone. But they really just using traditional des, stuff from like 1986 on there. On the first beta releases for the simulator, the BB App World access was restricted. When you opened it up, it was actually making a call with a BlackBerry ID, which you could sign up for and actually sign into on the simulator. But it also needed a valid hardware ID, which is it's not a serial number, but it's an indication it's an actual phone. And that was passed in a get string to the server. So I had more slides talking about how to modify the file on the phone, on the simulator, and get access to App World and download all the apps and have all that fun stuff. But they just went ahead and fixed that in the latest version. So if you download, not the 10.3 simulator, but if you download the 10.9.2372, it is the earliest one you can download. App World works fine. So here's a simulator with App World running. I was like, you sons of bitches, take away all my fun. Alright, so next steps here. We can explore the file system, have a lot of fun going on. Zach Lanier and Ben Nell, Zach's here this week, gave a really good talk about the internals for the BlackBerry 10. They were spending a lot of time poking around in it. They have a lot more information to then step up and go to the information. So check out their talk from CanTech West. I think it's called No Apologies Required. It was a joke for the Canadians. Alright, BlackBerry 10 apps. Also a radical departure for BlackBerry. For the earlier systems, 6 and 7, you could only write stuff in Java. Well, there's like 4 different ways to write in BB10 now. You can do native, C, C++, yay, buffer overflows again, so exciting. HTML5, Adobe Air, and Android. BB10 apps are wrapped in bar files, very similar to an APK, if you're familiar with Android development. So they are signed zip archives, essentially. There's 2 directories that are inside these when they're an actual package. We have the meta-if directory, which contains the checksums, manifests, all that good stuff, and also the native directory, or it will be /Android if it's a wrapped APK. Here's a picture of the bar unzipped. 2 files. The manifest is almost similar to the Android manifest XML. It describes the application, what access it needs. It also includes all the checksums to verify the files that are there, package information, all that good jazz. Inside the native directory, we have the bar descriptor.mxl, and that talks just about the bar file itself. It has more information than what the manifest does. And additionally, there's the application binary and whatever assets or resources are included for the application. Now with world access and the device rooted, we can start exploring the applications that are on the market. When the app is installed on the phone, an actual phone, the bar file is deleted. It's not like Android where the APKs are still sitting there and they run in a different directory. They're actually pretty much installed, so the bar is exploded and put on the device. So it was starting to, and you can't see that on the phone by your dev user. You only have access to the applications you would submit to the phone. So you can't like download from App World, Facebook and see and grab that binary. But now that we have root access on the simulator and world access, we can start to poke around. So if you want to do online banking on a BlackBerry 10, you're just going to cry. The only 2 US-based banks that are up there that have apps on Z10 are Wells Fargo and Bank of America. That's it. Everyone else is Canadian and European. So they must have a pretty big market share over there. Oh, and a Bitcoin, of course. Want to pay with Bitcoin? There's always one, right? This is what it says. This application uses a My Wallet account. So it's not actually paying with Bitcoin. And the fun stuff starts here. They have a transaction fee for every payment made to the device. Fantastic. So it's a free app, but you have to pay to use it in Bitcoin. No one likes it. Doesn't work. There's this application called Saishi. It's an open source tool that from the guy who worked on Dingleberry, actually, that allows you to uninstall or install BlackBerry firmware applications and also extract and search for them on BlackBerry stores. The application pretends to be the app world, so you can talk to BlackBerry servers, start download firmware images and all that fun stuff. And it also allows you to interact with a device. It also pretends to be like BlackBerry Link, so you can backup, restore, wipe, and what they says nuke a device. Pretty much just wipe it clean, or remove the firmware. Right? I would do it. Here's a picture of Sashizi running with access to the app world. This was a surprise to me. I didn't know this until I downloaded it last week. That you can just download apps from this too. So now I don't even need the simulator for it. Just download this thing and go. Here's a picture of the firmware. So you put in your country, you can put in your carrier and your device, and actually talk to BlackBerry servers and have the firmware. So this one up here is the actual firmware for the device, 200 meg. So you can download that and start poking around the firmware if you really wanted to. Installing apps. So this is fun. Normally with the Z10, you would have to be have a developer account, have a developer certificate, sign your apps, and push it off to the phone. With Sachizi, you can sideload apps. If you have a signed bar from anywhere, you can push them to the phone through this. And it'll tell you the applications that are already there, and you can select and install the file. So, what kind of fun things can we do here? Well, let's repack some apps, right? We have the access to the meta-inf and native directories when the apps are installed on the simulator, and we can extract them from the simulator as well. So, we can grab what's left behind. And that's, these are the directories from apps that are installed, so sys.whatever, and they're always appended with, must be some like base64 encoded stuff. So here's the Wells Fargo banking app installed with the meta-inf and native, which that's in the package, and it creates this public directory for public files to be accessible. Alright, so the public isn't really needed. You can just get rid of that. So we have root access, BB World running. We can pull the apps off the simulator, repackage them into a bar, use a bar sign-in tool to sign them, and push them back to a device. So this could allow for privacy, right? Piracy. This is purely academic. I don't think there's such a thing as third-party BlackBerry stores. I don't think China has a whole bunch of BlackBerry third-party markets like they do Android. But this is possible to do. So you can get the BlackBerry developer cert. It takes a couple hours to get it. It's where you gotta like submit stuff and they have to generate keys for you. It's a very weird process compared to Android. I'm not gonna go into what to do that here. You download the app through the simulator. We can then SSH in, we'll telnet in, well FTP, and pull off the files for the meta-inf and the native directory. Just zip them up, rename it a bar, re-sign it with your developer cert, and install it through. Such easy. So here is the two directories that I pulled off for the thing, and then the bank.bar, which I just zipped and renamed it to be a .bar. We're going to sign the bar. So BlackBerry has a whole bunch of command line tools. So BlackBerry signer. So that went through just fine. And you don't need your debug token installed on the device. When you develop BlackBerry apps and are pushing into the device, you need to install what's called a debug token that allows you to push your development apps to it, the ones that aren't fully signed. This is a process you don't need a debug token to push apps to a device now. And you can just silo them through such easy. This is the log that comes up when you are installing stuff saying, hey, I installed. And there's, I did ing for this one. So this I pulled off the simulator, wrapped it, signed it, and pushed it off and it ran. There's not a lot of tools to do dynamic analysis on BlackBerry because we don't have root access to the actual device, and you can't pull something from the app world and run on the device if it has native code. Some of the HTML5 apps will run, and the Android apps will run, but any app that has native code from the world won't run because it's compiled for ARM and not x86 like the simulator. So it's really hard to dynamically mess with an application that you're running, but we can at least look at the application it's talking to its backend services, right? So that's, one step in performing an assessment on a BlackBerry application. All you have to do is just enable the proxy and install your root CA like burps so that the device will trust the CA and the traffic will go through. So here's the settings on the phone, typical. And then when the phone is mounted, it does use Samba to communicate back and forth. So you can you plop your cert that you want on the device and then access it and just install it. And here is the BlackBerry traffic going back to their thing saying, hey, we're good. It's HTTP traffic, which is fantastic. Letting it know that it is alive. So BlackBerry talks back to its server saying that, hey, this phone's on. That's how it verifies you have connectivity. All right, so now some of the fun stuff that I found exploring these BlackBerry 10 devices. The first one, you can just DOS to complete the device. This was fun. I was looking at the QNX documentation about how file systems were mounted, and it turns out there's this thing called dev/shmem. And I was like, let's poke around at that. It is a RAM file system, so it's a temporary storage that is mounted in memory. And it says, not actual file system, it's just a window into shared memory names that happen in some file system like characters. And it's just sitting there. So, and it's mounted too. I think it's mounted. I forget the directory it's mounted. We'll bring it up in a minute. But what's fun is it's the entire RAM. So you can just fill it up. So it's mounted to dev shmem. So you can just use DD, and it's a world-readable file because it's a temporary system, and just fill it up. Running DD, just write zeros to the shmem. After a few seconds, the phone is just unusable. It just freezes on you. And you have to reboot the device to have the issue gone. So this is one way someone could be malicious on your device. Told BlackBerry about it, and this was their response. While it would be ideal to have the system be more stable under intentional resource exhaustion attacks, blah, 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 it's an area for future design changes, not a vulnerability we would release a security update for. So they're like, oh, well, let's look at it later. It's how QNX was designed to run, and it's left it on there. That was their response when I emailed their security team. Fantastic. The clipboard. So remember when I said that apps aren't supposed to read and write outside of their own directory? Well, it turns out the clipboard file, the clipboard directory is world readable and writable on the system. So any application can read and write to the file that's in the clipboard. Now, unlike Android and iOS, where you can only communicate with the clipboard through an API, it's not just like stored in a file somewhere. I think it's just stored in memory, and you use the API calls to push and pull what's off of it. And obviously, you can't have multiple things pasted at a time. Well, here's the file, and this is a command shell I was using on the device. So the clipboard is in accounts 1000, which is your non-privileged user account, and then the clipboard. And you can just touch a file there, so it touch balls. And then that file is now there in that directory. What we could also do is, using some code, is read that whenever we want to. So if you did it programmatically with Blackberries APIs, if you read something off the clipboard, it gets removed. Right? Once you paste it, it clears the clipboard. Not when you just do this. You can just read the clipboard. Whenever something's put in copy, this text.plain, and it'll dump it out, and that information will still be there. Remember I said that this was world readable and writable, so even the work side can access this file. So if your work wants to be malicious, not only can they read your emails, bits and pieces of it, which I wish I had screenshots of to show you guys, they can also read your clipboard when you're in the personal space. Have an app to sit there and read this file constantly and spit out the fun information. There's a couple tools that you use to connect to an actual device. You have to push an SSH key over, and the shell access is very limited. And you use this application called BlackBerry Connect, and you have to auth using a private key, and only get access to dev user. So I was poking around at this, and I saw that they were just Java files, just jar files you were using to connect, and it was pushing different parameters and doing all that fun stuff. So when I decompiled them, I found this interesting setting: authenticate as root. What? So when it makes a target setting, which is the object it uses to actually connect to the device, one of the Boolean options is if it's going to authenticate as root or not. It didn't work. I modified it to always pass as true. I think it needs some other sort of key or something. Looking more through the code, it looks like they talk to what they call an RTAS server, which must be something internally. So it's a whole bunch of other code of it trying to authenticate to that to grab whatever token to auth as root. So if you just try and auth as root, it won't work. Definitely needs more exploration there to see if you can force the device, if you could force authenticating as root. There's probably some more options we can pass over, but I haven't had any luck with that yet. So, thank you. Does anyone have any questions? Yes. Correct. Right. So that is true, right? So when the environment I was testing on had that too. So personal cannot touch a work, and the clipboards were separate. So from the workspace, I was able to hit the work clipboard, which I think it's like accounts, might have been like enterprise or 1001 or something. It's just another accounts clipboard, and that was protected. But from the workspace, I could still touch the 1000 clipboard because that's world read and writable. It's like 666. I would have to have an environment to test. You can, I'll have my slides up. Follow me on Twitter and I'll put them out. So the directories will be there, and I'll put up the command shell file app I was using. And if you install that on the enterprise side, then you can, just do ls and try and touch those files. Yeah. Yes. I messed with the Android environment on the simulator, and I was trying to gain root access in the Android environment, and that did not work. I modified the hell are the settings? The read-write settings and whatever the boot thing is. to make it so that you have development. I forget what the settings were. I took a while on that, but the Android environment wouldn't load. It was also a really early release of the simulator I was working on, so maybe the more recent releases, the environment might be more stable now. Now it's more ripe for exploration, but at the time, I attempted to break out and didn't have much luck. All right, cool. Thanks for coming, guys.